So my name is Jerry Dugan. I am the host of a show called Beyond the Rut. I've been the host of the show for 2 whole years. Before that, I was the co-host, the producer, the guy who just made sure the episodes got done. And so this story is, how do you get guests for your show that meet your target audience's need and do it on short notice? So to tell that story effectively, we got to open up with Storytime. 2 years ago, January 2021, I'm the co-host. I'd come back from Podcast Movement 2020. Actually, no, that was the year of COVID. So that was a virtual event, but I was still fired up. And I had ideas for the new year, and things were going good. Getting momentum going, talking to folks. Then February comes along, and that's when the host of my show tells me he pod-faded without me. And I was like, hey, wait, what? I got ideas. What do we do? He goes, well, you can do what you want. I'm done. And I'm like, oh, but he didn't say it like that. He was much more gentler about it. So February 2021, I took over the show. We passed the domain over to me, the email, the calendar, all the things that I learned were not touched for about 4 to 6 months. I got the last 4 episodes of our show in the inventory lined up, ready to publish, and it was now time to look at the next schedule of guests, which would have been March, the first Saturday of March. Because for years, we batch recorded first Saturday of March. This is what our recording schedule looked like the first Saturday of March. I was like, uh-oh. Oh, wow. There was nobody there. I'm like, that's cool. I'll just go to April and ask if anybody wants to go early. That was April right there. Like, all right, maybe somebody in May. Boom. I had one guy, my friend Eric Nevins. It was a re-record for the one time in 9 years of podcasting that I forgot to hit record. Yeah, and that was the soonest he was available, so there was no, yeah, I can show up in March. What do you need? I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. I got 1 week to get a guest lined up or decide to go solo. And I was also still dealing with imposter syndrome at the time, so going solo was not an option for me. I needed a qualified guest to meet my target audience's need, and I needed them in less than 7 days. What I'm going to talk with you about in this session is not only did I get a guest for that Saturday, within 30 days, I lined up guests for the rest of the year. I was like, what? And then on top of that, I had to leverage systems and processes to manage everybody who came in within those 30 days. There was a lot of information. I got ADHD, so keeping track of everybody was a challenge. Now, this worked out so well that it gave me 4 months to not worry about recording. And for the first time in the 6 years of this show, I was able to think strategically about what's next for Beyond the Rut and then repeat that cycle. So that's what we're going to cover in this session. What did I do to get recentered? How did I line up those guests for the rest of the year 2021? And on top of that, line up time to strategize about my show and then repeat this process 2 years after that in a row. And then the third thing I'll talk about is what's next. Now that the pandemic is pretty much over, I've learned a lot of lessons. I've seen what works really well, what doesn't, and then how do I grow my show and the guest quality of the show going forward with the tools that we have available. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of this, glean from it, and realize that finding guests for yourself that meet your niche audience is a bit easier than you realize it is. So, first things first, I had to remember the why of the show. So all of February, while I was panicking, which really was just, 3 weeks, it's a half month kind of thing, I had to remember, why did Beyond the Rut exist? Who did I want to help? I wanted to help a guy named AJ. Who's AJ? AJ's 38 years old. He's a Christian. He's married. He's got 2 kids. He's got a 6-figure salary from a corporate job that he's worked his entire life to get. He's got the 2-story house, 2 cars, the car payments that go with the 2 cars. He's got the 1-hour commute every morning that he hates to go to a job that he hates, to deal with a boss that he can't stand. And at the end of the day, he drives for an hour back home to a family that wants his attention every single day, but he has nothing left in the gas tank for them. So there's a strain on his family, his marriage, his kids, and so on. So how do I want to help AJ? I want to help AJ look up and look forward in his life and redefine success, because chances are AJ was following somebody else's definition of success. So that's who I wanted to help. That's how I wanted to help him. And you're probably thinking at this point, who the heck is AJ? Yeah. AJ was my avatar, and he still is my avatar. But I had to remember my why, because it turns out for the first 5 years of the show, we gradually got away from helping AJ. And we just started interviewing people because we thought they were cool. Like, oh, you ran a marathon? Cool, come on down. Does AJ want to run a marathon? No. Now, the real life AJ doesn't know this, but we did base AJ off a real person. And yeah, anyway. So I had to think about, now that I knew who I was helping and how I wanted to help him, who does AJ really want to hear from? Since my avatar is based off of a real person, it was kind of easy. Who does AJ in real life listen to, talk to, find credible? And so for him, since my show is kind of a Christian faith-based show, but incognito, sometimes AJ wants to hear from a pastor, but not always. AJ doesn't want Bible thumping over his head every single week. He gets enough of that from church. Great. So who else does he listen to? He listens to business leaders who found a way to balance work, grow in their career, have a thriving marriage, and be engaged in their kids' lives. So my guests had to shift and be more of that. Now, you probably didn't come here thinking I was going to talk about avatars, but knowing my avatar, knowing your avatar, is really the linchpin that helps you understand who you're going to say yes to, who you're going to ask for first, who you're going to say yes to, and as importantly, who are you going to say no to? Because that, you'll find out, is going to be more important than just trying to find guests once you get this ball rolling, is how do you say no to people? Once I remembered who my avatar was and why I wanted to help that avatar, next part, it's easier said than done, but it was done. And that was, I needed to communicate my avatar's need to people. And I don't know, do all of you know somebody who podcasts besides yourself? Okay, cool. I did too. So that was the first realization I had. I needed a quick win, right? Because I had, 7 days to find a guest. I went to people I already knew. Podcasters who had shows similar to mine, who would probably want to be a guest on my show. Because if they're already a podcaster, they probably have skills around a microphone. They understand how to do a remote interview. They understand interviews, and they could knock something out very quickly. Now, my friend, second from the left, Eric, I already knew he wasn't available until May, right? Was that time I forgot to hit record? Yeah. Fun fact, by the way, he is my most downloaded episode. So a different talk for another podcast movement is the strategy around forget to hit record on the first interview, record the second one, boom. Maybe not. That's probably not a good idea, actually. We won't do that one. But I went out to people I knew. So I contacted other podcasters with similar shows, and I said, hey, this is the pickle I'm in. I just took over my show. And they're like, what? I thought you were already in charge of that show. No, it was somebody else's. Okay, well, what do you need? I need a guest, like Saturday, to record with me. You got time? Yeah, I got time Saturday. All right, cool. This is the topic I'm thinking. That sound good to you? Yeah, can we also squeeze in this topic? I'm like, yeah, let's do that. I didn't just get one person to say yes, because I blasted 20 people that I knew who were friends and podcasters with similar shows. I wound up with 7. My typical batch recording day had 5 slots. So I had to add 2 more slots to the day to accommodate my friends who said yes. So now I went from having nothing for March of 2021 to now having all of March taken care of and most of April. I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. Now, I didn't just stop with my podcast friends. There were 2 companies out there, and they're still out there, that over the years had referred great guests to us. How many of you have heard of Interview Valet? No? Okay, well, now you have. How about book launchers? No, now you have. So 2 folks I knew from both of those companies, Tom Schwab from Interview Valet and Sarah Bean from Book Launchers. Interview Valet is a company that their clients want to be booked on shows. So if you saw Scout's presentation yesterday from Scout's agency, that's what she does. Yeah, so Interview Valet, they were one of the first ones to do that. I just let them know, hey, we're still running a show. This is what I'm open to. And remember my avatar I told you about? I put that in the email. This is who I'm trying to help. This is my avatar. This is the person I want to help. This is how I want to help them. Do you have any guests that can meet that need? They immediately sent me 3 recommendations that were spot on, perfect for my guest need. And so I scheduled them for my April recording session. And then book launchers lady, Sarah Bean, I said the same thing. Hey, Sarah, still around. Hope you're doing well. Didn't see you at the last podcast movement. By the way, this is who I'm trying to help. Do you have any authors coming out with books that will meet that need? She sent me 2 people, awesome people. So now I have the rest of April taken care of. I've got May. Then I was like, you know what? This is kind of cool. I got some breathing room, but I've gone through all the people I know personally. Now what? Boom. So I went to social media. Now, I just threw in the Clubhouse and Fire. I'm not actually on Fireside or Clubhouse. I just know some people are. That's not important. But the other 3 are social media platforms that I'm active on. Now, for me personally, in my own story, I only dealt with one of these 3 and got all my success for booking the guests I was looking for, and that's that top one, Facebook. I was in 2 podcasting groups at the time, just 2. Podcast Movement was one of them, and Christian Podcasters Association was the other. And I don't know how or why, but the timing was perfect because both of those groups posted a Be a Guest thread because they want to avoid people spamming the feed. So if you're going to pitch to be a guest, you had to wait for that thread to pop up once every month or 2 or 3. And it just happened to pop up. Boom. If you want to be a guest, this is where you want to plug yourself right now. I'm like, well, I don't want to be a guest. I'm a host. I'm looking for guests, but I don't want to read everybody's stuff because I've got a show I'm trying to take over because I did take over, and I'm trying to get all this stuff squared away. So again, remember that avatar description I told you about? I took that description, I posted in there, and I put in caps. I am looking for this kind of guest who can meet the needs of my friend AJ. Here's AJ's life story. Boom. Each of those feeds brought in 20 people each who wanted to be on my show. So for the first time in my life, I had to learn how to say no. Because there were a lot of people who responded who clearly didn't read AJ's story. There were people who wanted to go in and do a Bible study on the book of Paul. Actually, there's no book of Paul. But anyway, it was a test. You all passed. Good job. And there were people who wanted to go into mysticism. I'm like, no, that's not AJ's need. There was nothing in that description that described that. So I had to say no politely. But there were a lot of folks that really hit it. And I was like, nice. I think the folks who probably were the most hurt were the ones who wanted to talk about Bitcoin and NFTs. I'm like, no, clearly AJ doesn't care about that. He's worried about saving his marriage. So if you're going to do this, 3 big tips if you're going to post on social media. Number 1, be appropriate. Don't spam the group because it'll put everybody off and they'll probably kick you out of the group. So wait for that Be a Guest thread, or maybe reach out to the owner of the group and say, hey, I'm a podcaster. I think there are a bunch of other podcasters in here. Have you ever thought about doing a Be a Guest thread and have everybody post just in that? So if you're in a niche group on Facebook, that's a communication to have. So you said autism? Yeah. So if you're in a group about autism, talk to the owner of that group and see if they'd be willing to post some kind of collaborative thread or post, or you can pitch to each other only in that thread and put your avatar story in that thread. I'm looking for somebody who can meet these needs and is comfortable on a microphone. I'll take care of the rest. I'll talk you through it, and then you'll get your responses. So be clear about who you're looking for, your avatar, because again, it tells you who you're looking for to say yes to and who to say no to. And it gives you the written proof why you're saying no. You're not just saying no because you think the person's a weird guy. They clearly don't meet your target audience's need. And then be ready to say no. I think I mentioned that a few times, which is hard for me because I'm a people pleaser. And I wanted to say yes to everybody, turn it into a daily show. My wife had to remind me, no, you've got a life. Remember that. I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. Podcasting isn't life? It isn't? No, kidding. Okay. Other things I learned right away within those 30 days, just like that movie Jaws, they needed a bigger boat. I was going to need a bigger calendar. Already I was using Calendly to book guests for these recording days. But I realized there needed to be more information for the guest because now I was booking guests in the month of February and March, but I wasn't going to see them again until August, maybe even September. So it's like, well, how are we going to remember who we are if we don't have any notes? So my confirmation email that goes out of Calendly reminds the guest, this is what the show is about. This is my target audience, but it isn't the full bio of AJ. It's just some bullet points. My target audience is Christian men, 30s and 40s, married with children, 6-figure income, but they feel stuck in life. How do we want to get unstuck? By the way, this is on Zoom. Here's some technical pieces. And by the way, this is what you told me you want to talk about. And my questionnaire on Calendly only has 3 questions. Because I run into folks, they've got like a 15 questionnaire on Calendly, and then I got to submit for a background check, mother's maiden name, all that kind of stuff, and then sign off on some legal documents. I'm like, I already don't want to be on that show. I still do it just because I have a goal to be on shows this year. But my format survey only has 3 questions on it. What's the rut you help people get out of? What should I look at of your material to prepare for our conversation together, such as website, book, articles, past interviews, and so on? And then the third one is there anything about you that you want to talk about that you normally don't get a chance to talk about? Now, why is that question in there? Who's heard of John Lee Dumas? Okay, more than just me. Good, thank you guys, all 2 of you. So John Lee Dumas taught this to me a few years back, not personally, it was at a podcast movement session, and I was like in the 5th row, gawking at him. It was weird, but my wife wasn't there to see it. So anyway, he said, if you want your guests to share your episode with their circle, it's got to be unique to their audience too. Because if they're out there doing 20 to 100 interviews a year, and it's the same old interview every time, they're not going to bore their audience with that. But if you provide some new piece of the conversation for them, they're like, hey, you know what? I never talked about journaling before. I'm going to share that with my circle. So that's why that third question's in there on Calendly. So now they're excited. And they also remember, like if you're booking now for an August interview, when you send out reminders every so often, and especially the week before, they're like, oh yeah, I remember you. I remember what we're going to talk about. And hey, by the way, I just published a new book that's not on this thing. Here's a copy if you want to read it. So I highly recommend you just get your Calendly squared away so that it provides those reminders for both you and your guest. I still stuck with my batch recording on the first Saturday of the month, and then I quietly created a second weeknight, once a month block. And I reserved it for the people I really wanted on my show who were not available at all on Saturdays. And I mean people I wanted, not people who thought they were more important to give me a Saturday, but people I actually knew and wanted, like a Cliff Ravenscraft or a Lou Mongello. Like those guys, I'm like, yeah, I will give you any day you want, except my anniversary. I can't do that. So I stuck to my batch recording days. And that made it easy for everybody. Now, before this, I would just track each individual guest on Evernote. But now I'm dealing with about 35 people plus 60 to 70 requests to be on my show. And my brain just could not keep up with that data. And John Lee Dumas is married to somebody named Katie Erickson. And she showed in one of these events their guest tracking sheet. It's an Excel sheet, tells you who your guest is, their email address, phone number, their show, the topic you plan to talk about with them. When do you plan to interview them? Is it scheduled already? When is that episode due to air? What's the number of the episode? All that stuff. That, I don't know why, but at the age of 45, I finally realized the value of Excel in podcasting. And so I actually copied their worksheet, and I've been using it ever since. So I could see all my guests in one spot. And if there's a name that I thought I booked and I don't see them on the recording sheet, it reminded me, oh yeah, follow up with Cliff. And sure enough, there's the email tucked away at the bottom of my inbox. I'm like, no, I want that guy. And so I could follow up with somebody like Cliff Ravenscraft and get him on the show. So that guest tracker, huge, huge. So I've shared with you so far, I got back in line with who my audience needed, how they needed to be talked, who they needed to hear from, how I reached out, how I got more than enough responses and had to find a way to track all that. But during those 30 days, I also got an invite to attend a podcasting conference that was coming to Dallas. This is in 2021. So it wasn't Podcast Movement, it was a smaller one. But it was happening in, I think, April or May. And I don't know about y'all, but if I'm a podcaster and I'm going to a podcast or in a conference, if it fits my niche, I am bringing equipment to record interviews. So this is actually from Podcast Movement, whichever one was in Nashville. So it's not the one that I did in 2021 with the Christian Podcasters group. But what I typically will do is I'll just record kind of on the street. Like I'll have 3 questions. Like, hey, what's the rut you help people get it out of? And they tell me, all right, how do you help people get out of that rut? they tell me, all right, now if people want more of you, where do they go to find you? And I'll just get like 7 or 8 people that I met during the conference to do that quick little 5-minute interview, put them all together into one episode. I publish that as soon as I can after the conference. And then the ones that really stood out to me, I follow up and I schedule full interviews. So that event I went to in April or May, I recorded with 7 people. I booked 4 full interviews with them. And one of them also referred her spouse to me to record with him. So I really got 5 interviews out of one, just Jerry on the street kind of conversation I had with multiple people. Also, one of these times I had Jared easily beatbox for me. So every once in a while, I'll throw that in as my theme song. But you got to listen because I'll play it real low. And it's like, is he beatboxing? No, not me, Jared. So anyway, so this is me. I reached out to my friend Jeff Brown before the Nashville podcast movement because he was publishing a book. And it was a win-win scenario. I wanted Jeff Brown. He's a podcasting hero to me. He was publishing a book at the same time. I was like, how would you like to talk about your book and how reading can get people out of their ruts? It's like, I'd love it. We missed our first day, found him on the second day. I even pretended I bought him orange juice, but ABC News was sponsoring breakfast that morning, and so I just grabbed an extra orange juice for him. He didn't drink it, but it's okay. That's not important. But then I met up with somebody who talked about adult children of divorce and how they had to heal so that their own marriages thrive. Something that AJ would want to hear about. Podcasting friend of mine apparently thought I had a reputation for eating on conference calls, so she brought me snacks on the way in. People thought that was my podcast sign. No, that's my bag of snacks I carried around. They were chips. They were good. This is a guy I met on the 3rd day in the morning. Somebody introduced me to him, a guy named Vincent Puglisi. This is Ken Carfagno. He was on a corporate track to be a senior leader with, I think, GE. And then one day he heard a senior leader say, if you want to do what I do, you cannot have a family because you go where the company tells you. Ken pretty much quit that day. His last day was 2 years later when they caught up to him and said, hey, you kind of quit on us. He goes, yeah, I don't want to be here anymore. So he left GE, started a cleaning business. His podcast is all about helping people start their own cleaning business. We interviewed for like an hour at the end of the day after the keynote. He flipped the script and interviewed me for my own show, so I kind of got a twofer there because my audience had never heard from me. And so he was like, hey, let's talk about you. Like, no. So anyway. And then you ever go to a conference and they got like the recording booth? Like HubSpot does it at the big podcast movement? Get a slot. Even if you don't have any guests, get a slot. And then start finding guests. You're like, oh, hey, I got this booth for tomorrow at 11:30 in the morning. You got time to come and talk to me about whatever your topic is? And they say yes or they say no. You grab the person who says yes and you just meet them and boom, you record. If nobody shows up, you got a solo episode or you just start doing some catch up. Or you meet somebody that morning and say, hey, I got a booth right here in about 15 minutes. You want to join me? I get at least one interview recorded that way. By the time I leave a podcast movement, I've got 6 interviews under my belt, either on the event or lined up for after the event. So that Christian conference I went to in April or May, that finished out the year. By the time I showed up to the event in Nashville, I was now recording for the next year in August of 2021. I was recording for 2022 already. Man, it got to be so good that even my cat wanted to be involved. Yeah, he's so little. He's not that little anymore, by the way. He's a big cat. He's also my wife's favorite. I'm sorry. He's a big cat. So that is how I got a full year's worth of guests lined up in just 30 days. That was 2021. I repeated the process for 2022. But on top of that, I didn't have to record anymore in 2021 from October until February of the next year. So what did I do during that time? I thought about, what do I want to do with this show? What have I not done yet with this show? Like I've kept it together. I kept it going. I stopped it from pod fading, but now it's got to grow. And one of the things that happened during 2021 was I found the original 3-member team business plan that we wrote in 2015. And I read through that thing with heartbreaking revelation. Not a thing on that business plan had been carried out in almost 6 years. Year 1 was to write a book. I had now just finished year 6, no book. Year number 2 was to have workshops based off of the show. Didn't even have a book yet. So there was a business that didn't even exist. So 2022 was about grow the audience, really hone in on the message of Beyond the Rut, and get that book written no matter what. This Monday, that book comes out, by the way. Yeah. Woo. Now I'm nervous because people are going to actually read it and know how good or not good it is. But because of that 4-month window, I was able to really think through what is the most important thing that'll move the needle and help AJ and others like AJ. And that was the strategic thing I got started during that 4-month window. So now we're March 2023? As of 3 weeks ago, I have interviews booked all the way into August, which if everybody shows up, and the system I just showed you, I have, I think, about a 95% show up rate. Yeah, they don't flake on me. If the guy flakes, it's usually because time zone change, and I was the culprit of that this week. 2 hours back is a difference. Or they were sick, or a family member was sick, and they usually reschedule with me. I've only had one person not get back to me, and I don't go chase them down. Yeah, unless it's somebody I really want, and then it's like, all right, hey, I'd love to have you on the show. I'm sorry we didn't get to link up. But for most folks, if they flake, they don't even explain why, and I've already given them reminders, I just move on now. I have that bandwidth to do that. So I was saying, we're already March 2023. I'm booked until August. If everybody shows up, my interviews are covered until the end of November of this year. So essentially, I can stop recording by the end of Podcast Movement in Denver this year, and I'll have episodes to launch 2024. So what I'm going to talk about now, we're post-pandemic. Turns out I don't need to post on Facebook and get bombarded by people anymore. I've built enough traction that it's even easier now in the second and third year to find guests that fit my audience's needs. So, who's heard of Podmatch? Yeah. It's partly their fault that I'm booked through the rest of the year. I tried them out in November for $6 a month because, and if you don't know who Podmatch is, they're like a dating site and a podcast directory got together and had a baby.